My daughter called me on a Sunday afternoon in October, and I almost didn't hear the phone ring because my husband was in the kitchen loudly explaining to me for the third time that week why I didn't need to go to the grocery store alone. "I'll come with you," he said. "You always forget things. You always spend too much." I was 63 years old. I'd been grocery shopping by myself since I was 17. Picked up the phone anyway. "Hi, Mom," my daughter said. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, turning toward the window so my voice would stay steady. "Just fine." That was a lie. But I'd been telling that lie for so long by then that it came out as smooth and natural as breathing. My name is Margaret. I was a school librarian for 31 years in a small town in Ohio. I retired at 62, thinking that the next chapter of my life would be quiet and full. Morning walks, weekend visits from my grandchildren, maybe a book club, maybe a trip to see the fall leaves in Vermont that my husband Victor and I had been talking about for 15 years. I thought retirement meant freedom. What I didn't understand was that retirement for my husband meant something very different. Victor and I had been married for 38 years. For most of those years, he worked as a regional sales manager for a hardware distribution company, which meant he traveled frequently, sometimes 3 weeks out of every month. I raised our two children largely on my own. I managed the household, paid the bills, attended every school play and every soccer game and every parent-teacher conference. I was competent. I was organized. I was, in many ways, the person who held our family together with both hands for nearly 4 decades. When Victor retired 14 months before I did, I thought it would bring us closer. I thought we would finally have time together. Instead, something shifted in him that I still don't entirely understand. It was as though, without the structure of his job, he needed to find something else to manage. And what he chose to manage was me. It started small, so small that I almost didn't notice. He began asking where I was going when I left the house. Not in a warm way, not in a curious way, but in a careful way. The way someone catalogs information. "Where are you going?" And then, when I came home, "How long were you there?" And "Who did you see?" At first, I answered easily because I had nothing to hide. I was going to the library to return books. I was going to have coffee with my friend Diane. I was going to the pharmacy to pick up my blood pressure prescription. But the questions kept coming, and they kept getting more specific. "Why did you go to the pharmacy on a Tuesday? I thought you went on Fridays." Who was Diane talking about when she mentioned her neighbor? "Do you know that woman well?" "You were gone for 2 hours and 15 minutes. That's a long time for coffee." I told myself it was because he was adjusting, that he was lonely, that 38 years of being the one who traveled had made him anxious about the idea of me having a life he wasn't part of. I was patient with him. I tried to include him. I invited him to come along to things, to meet my friends, to join me on my morning walks. He almost never came. He just wanted to know that I had come back. When I retired, things got worse. I don't know exactly how to explain what happened next without sounding like I should have seen it coming. Maybe I should have. But when you are inside something, when it changes 1 degree at a time over many months, you don't always feel the heat until the water is already boiling. Victor suggested, gently reasonably, with a spreadsheet he had actually prepared, that we consolidate our finances. We were both retired now, he said, both living on fixed incomes. It made sense, he said, to pool everything into one account so we could budget properly and not overlap on expenses. He made it sound so practical, so sensible, so like something any reasonable couple would do. I had my own checking account at First Federal. I had held that account since I was 22 years old. My direct deposit from the school district's pension went in there every month, along with my Social Security. It was my account, my name, my history. I said I wasn't sure that was necessary. He brought out the spreadsheet again. He said I was being resistant for no reason. He said that at our age, it was important to be smart about money. He said that having separate accounts created confusion and redundancy. He said he wasn't trying to control me. He was trying to protect us. I want to be honest here because I think honesty is the only thing that makes a story like mine worth telling. I agreed. Not because I believed him entirely, but because I was tired of the conversation and because I had spent 38 years keeping the peace in our home, and because some part of me, the part that had watched him struggle since retirement, felt sorry for him. I thought, it's just an account. It's just paperwork. It won't change anything real. I was wrong about that. The account he had set up was in his name. I was listed as an authorized user, which is not the same thing as an account holder. I didn't understand the difference at the time. He handled the paperwork. I signed where he pointed. The first month, I asked him for $60 to get my hair cut and colored at the salon I had been going to for 11 years. He looked at the number and frowned. $60 for a haircut? It's a haircut in color, I said. It's always been $60. That seems excessive, he said. There's a place on Route 9 that does cuts for 18. I went to my salon. I paid $60. But I felt, walking out, like I'd done something wrong. The second month, he gave me what he called a household allowance. $200, the first of every month for my personal expenses. Things for myself, clothing, toiletries, gifts for friends, anything that wasn't a shared household cost. $200 a month, not even $7 a day. I stood in the kitchen holding the two folded $100 bills he had handed me, and I thought, I worked for 31 years. I have a pension. I have Social Security. I have money that I earned, and I am holding $200 and being told, this is enough. I didn't say any of that. I said, thank you, and I put the money in my purse, and I went to fold laundry, and I sat on the edge of the bed in our bedroom with a pile of his shirts in my lap, and I cried very quietly for about 10 minutes. Then I dried my face and went back to the kitchen and made dinner. My friend Diane noticed something was wrong before I admitted it to anyone. We had coffee at her kitchen table one Thursday morning in February. Victor had asked twice that morning where I was going and how long I would be. And she watched me stir my coffee without drinking it, and she finally said, Margaret, what's happening with you? I opened my mouth to say, nothing, I'm fine, which is what I always said. What came out instead was, I had to ask permission to buy a birthday card last week. Diane put her mug down slowly, He gave me my monthly money and I used some of it for groceries and some for my prescription copay. And by the third week, there was almost nothing left. And my college roommate Susan's birthday was coming, and I wanted to send her a card with a small gift. Victor said a card was fine, but the gift wasn't in the budget. I heard my own voice as I spoke, and it sounded like a voice from far away, flat, rehearsed. He said if I'd managed my allowance better, it wouldn't be an issue. Diane was quiet for a long moment. How long has this been going on? She asked. I had to think about it. That was the most frightening part. I had to actually sit and calculate backward to find the beginning because it had happened so gradually that there was no single clear starting point, just a slow, steady narrowing, like a hallway getting smaller and smaller until one day you realize you can barely turn around. About a year, I said, maybe longer. I watched Diane's face. She didn't look shocked. She looked sad and careful, the way people look when they've been waiting for you to say the true thing and they finally hear it. My sister went through something like this, she said quietly. They call it financial abuse. It's a real thing, Margaret. It has a name. I had never heard that term applied to anything in my own life. I was a librarian. I knew words, knew categories, knew how to find information about almost anything. But I had never once searched for that phrase and thought, that's me. That's my house. That's my marriage. On the drive home, I sat in the parking lot outside a hardware store for 20 minutes before I could make myself move. Over the next several weeks, I started paying attention in a different way. Not to what Victor said, but to the pattern underneath what he said. I started keeping a small notebook, nothing suspicious, just the kind of spiral bound notepad I'd always carried. And I began writing things down. Not a diary, just facts. March 4th. Asked for gas money for a trip to see my sister in Columbus. Denied. Told that we couldn't afford it. Victor went to his golf club that same afternoon, March 11th. Tried to use the joint debit card at the pharmacy. Card declined. Victor had set a daily spending limit I had not been told about. March 19th, asked if I could have the cable company contact information so I could make a change to our plan. Victor said he handled all utilities and I shouldn't worry about it. March 27th. My sister called to ask why I hadn't come. I didn't know what to say. I told her the car had been having trouble. What my notebook showed me, laid out in plain ink on narrow ruled lines, was that I had no access to my own money, no ability to make purchases without his knowledge, no way to travel more than a few miles without explaining myself, and no contact with the outside world that he didn't know about and didn't, in some quiet way, discourage. I was not physically confined to my house. I could leave. I had a car. I had my phone. But I had no money I controlled, no financial independence at all, and a husband who monitored my movements and asked questions and made me feel every single day that using any resource on myself without his approval was somehow irresponsible or selfish or wrong. I didn't tell Victor what I was thinking. I stopped telling him most things by April. What I did instead, very carefully and over many months, was begin to learn. I went back to the library, my library, the one where I had worked for 3 decades. where the new head librarian, Linda, always welcomed me and never asked what I was researching. I read everything I could find about financial abuse in marriage. I read about coercive control, which is the broader category, the pattern of behavior designed to make someone dependent and isolated. I learned that what Victor was doing was not a personality quirk or a retirement adjustment. It was abuse. It was a crime in several states. And it was something that had a documented, predictable escalation pattern if left unchanged. I also learned what I could do about it. I learned that I was legally entitled to my own pension, that Social Security benefits could only be paid to the recipient. Victor could not redirect my payments to his account without my signed consent. And my signed consent, given under a pattern of coercion, was legally questionable. I learned that any bank account I opened in my name alone was mine, and that I could open one at any institution I chose, using my own identification and my own social security number, and that Victor had no right to that account. I opened a new savings account at a credit union in the next town over in June. I used a small amount of cash I'd accumulated, money saved from the $200 monthly allowances, $5 here, $10 there, tucked into an envelope inside a box of old teaching materials in the back of the closet shelf. It was not much, but it was enough to open the account. Then I went to the Social Security Administration office. I requested that my benefit payments be redirected to the new account. I brought my identification, my Social Security card, my birth certificate, and a letter I written carefully, clearly, and without any emotion. The woman who helped me, a soft-spoken woman with glasses and silver hair who told me her name was Patricia, asked me once quietly whether I was safe at home. I said yes, I was safe. I was just making some changes. She nodded and asked no further questions, and she processed my request without hesitation. And when I walked out of that office, I sat in my car and gripped the steering wheel with both hands for a full minute because I could feel something in my chest beginning to loosen that had been tight for so long. I had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. I did not change my pension redirect all at once. I changed it in August, 2 months later, after I had already done everything else I needed to do. I didn't want Victor to notice a change in the joint account before I was ready. What I needed to do first was find a place to go. I called my daughter Claire in July, not to tell her everything, not yet, but to ask a careful question. If I ever needed to come stay with you for a while, I said, would that be all right? There was a pause. Claire is 34 years old. She lives in Pennsylvania with her husband and their 2 children, my grandchildren, who I see 4 or 5 times a year. She is perceptive in the way that children who grew up watching one parent compensate for another often are. Mom, she said, you can come whenever you want. For as long as you want, you know that. I know, I said. I just wanted to make sure. Another pause. Mom, are you okay? I'm working on it, I said. That was the most honest thing I had said to anyone in more than a year. I told Diane everything in August: the notebook, the credit union account, the Social Security change, the pension redirect I had just completed. She listened to all of it without interrupting, and when I finished, she said, "What do you need from me?" I told her I needed her address. She looked at me. "I'm going to have some things sent there," I said, "a few documents, just for safekeeping." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine and squeezed once and said, "Done." The documents I had sent to Diane's address were copies of everything: my pension statements, my Social Security records, the new account information, my birth certificate, my passport, copies of our joint tax returns for the last 5 years, and a single sheet of paper on which I had written, in my librarian's precise handwriting, a clear and factual description of everything Victor had done since his retirement: dates, amounts, direct quotes when I could remember them. I had learned by then that documentation was everything, that women who left without it often spent years trying to prove what had happened. I was not going to leave without it. My last day in that house was a Wednesday in September. I'd chosen a Wednesday because Victor had a standing morning appointment on Wednesdays, a breakfast group with 3 other retired men that he attended every week without fail. He would be gone by 8 in the morning and would not return until 10:30 or 11. That gave me 2.5 to 3 hours. I needed less than one. The night before, I did not sleep much. I lay in the dark and listened to Victor breathe beside me. And I thought about the 38 years of our marriage, the good parts, which were real and plentiful, especially in the early years. I thought about the children we had raised, the holidays, the hard years when money was tight and we held each other up. I grieved those things quietly and privately in the dark because I understood that leaving did not erase them, and it didn't need to. It just meant that what came after them was not going to be this. I got up at 6. I made coffee. I made Victor's coffee too, because stopping would have been suspicious, and I was not going to let anything be suspicious on that last morning. He came downstairs at 7, drank his coffee, and told me he was going to breakfast. "Have a good time," I said. He paused at the door. "What are your plans today?" he asked. "I thought I might do some reading," I said. "Maybe take a walk later." He nodded. He left. I stood at the kitchen window and watched his car back out of the driveway and turn down the street and disappear. And then I went upstairs and I pulled the suitcase out from the back of the closet. A medium-sized navy blue rolling suitcase I had bought 3 weeks earlier at a thrift store and kept at Diane's house until the night before, when I quietly brought it inside while Victor was watching television. And I packed. I packed practically. Clothing for 2 weeks, my medications, the folder I had been building for months, all the copies, all the documents, everything, my laptop, the small frame photograph of Claire and her children from the nightstand beside my bed, my mother's pearl earrings that had been on my dresser since the day she gave them to me at my wedding, a book I hadn't finished. I took nothing that wasn't mine. I loaded the suitcase into my car. I took one look back at the house from the driveway, the garden I had planted along the front walk, the porch where we had sat on summer evenings, the yellow front door I had painted myself 10 years ago and always loved. I let myself look at it for exactly as long as it took to remember that I loved those things and that loving them did not mean I had to stay. Then I got in my car and I drove to Diane's house, where I sat at her kitchen table and drank the best cup of coffee I had tasted in years and finally told her daughter, who happened to be visiting, the whole story from beginning to end while Diane held my hand. I called Claire from Diane's living room. I told her I was coming to Pennsylvania. I told her it wasn't a visit. I told her what had been happening. She cried. I told her not to because I wasn't crying anymore and because everything was going to be all right. I drove to Pennsylvania the next morning. Victor called me 41 times between Wednesday afternoon and Thursday evening. I know because I counted. I didn't answer. I let each call go to voicemail. And I listened to the messages, not because I owed him anything, but because after 38 years, I felt I should hear what he had to say when the performance was over and it was just him alone in our house, confronted with the consequence of what he had done. The first calls were sharp, demanding. Where was I? I needed to call him back immediately. This was completely unacceptable behavior for a woman my age. By the eighth or ninth call, something shifted. His voice got quieter, more uncertain. By the 20th call, he was saying he was sorry, that he knew things had gotten out of hand, that he wanted to talk, that he loved me. By the 35th call, he was crying. I listened to all of them. And I thought about the woman who had cried very quietly into a pile of laundry so her husband wouldn't hear her. And I thought about the woman who had sat in a parking lot unable to move. And I thought about the woman who had stood at a Social Security Administration desk and been asked if she was safe at home. And I thought that woman deserved better. She deserved better for a long time. And she was finally getting it. I have been living with Claire and her family for 3 months now. I have my own room, small and south facing, with a window that gets good morning light, and I have put a few of my own things in it, and it feels more and more like mine. I'm seeing a counselor every 2 weeks, a calm, no nonsense woman named Dr. Reeves, who specializes in this particular kind of harm and who has helped me understand that what happened to me was not my fault and was not inevitable and is not in any way the story of how I will spend whatever time I have left. I have reconnected with my sister. We have talked on the phone more in the last 3 months than we did in the last 3 years. She cried when I called her. I told her about the trip to Columbus I had wanted to take in March and hadn't been allowed. She said, "Come in November." I said I would. Victor has retained a lawyer. So have I. The process is what it is. Paperwork, negotiations, the long, slow bureaucratic work of disentangling a life shared across nearly 4 decades. It is not painless. Some days it is very hard. But I want to tell you something that I keep coming back to, something that has become, in these last months, almost like a compass. On the morning I drove away from that house, I stopped at a gas station about 20 miles down the highway. I went inside and I stood at the counter and I ordered a large coffee. Not the brand I usually got, not the one that Victor had a loyalty card for, but a different one. One I had always liked the smell of when I passed it and never ordered because it wasn't what we usually did. And I paid for it with my own debit card from my own account, and I walked back to my car and I sat in the front seat in the pale September sunlight and I drank that coffee. It was the best cup of coffee I have ever had in my life. Not because of the coffee, because of the hand that was holding it. I know there are women listening to this who recognize something in my story. Maybe not every detail, but some of it. The smallness of the allowance, the weight of the question, where are you going? The way it feels to have to ask permission for something that has always been yours. I want you to know that what I felt for a very long time, the shame of not leaving sooner, the confusion about whether what was happening to me was bad enough to call by its real name. Those feelings do not mean you are weak. They mean you are human, and you have been in something very deliberately designed to make you doubt yourself. Financial abuse is real. Coercive control is real. And both of them are far more common than most people know. If any part of what I have described feels familiar to you, I want you to do one thing, just one thing to start. Find out what you are entitled to: your pension, your Social Security benefits, your legal rights as a spouse, information that belongs to you, that no one can take, and that might be the first small stone on a very long road back to yourself. It is not too late. I promise you that. I am 63 years old, and I am sitting in a sunny room in Pennsylvania with a cup of coffee I chose myself. And I am not asking anyone's permission to be here. That is everything. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you're watching this on Twisted QVX Stories for the first time, stay with us. We tell these stories because they matter. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to know that the door is still there, even when it's been hidden from them for a very long time.